This is revision session for Weimar and Nazi Germany number 5. This is the session that I'm going to focus on exam technique. So I'm going to go through each of the types of question. Obviously I don't know what's going to be in the questions or what the questions are going to be on, but I can tell you some basic instructions on how to lay out your answers. Okay, so the first type of question is the 4-mark inference question. I'll do that first. And then I'll move on to, it'll be helpful actually if you do this revision session with your mock exam in front of you. So you can see the first question is the 4-marker, the inference question. Second question is the 12-marker explain question, where you're given 2 bullet points and you're expected to go beyond those bullet points. Very much like a couple of peel paragraphs really. The third question is a source question. Study sources B and C, how useful are sources B and C for an inquiry into? Then the fourth question is based on interpretations. Now don't let these scare you, but they're not the sources, they're interpretations. So it's 2 interpretations of something to do with Weimar and Nazi Germany. And you'll have to study interpretations 1 and 2 and explain the difference between the views therein. Question 5, well actually it's called question 3C. So we've got 3A, 3B and 3C. Question 3C is suggest one reason why those interpretations are different. Slightly different question, but very similar. And then the last question, 3D, where 4 marks are available for spelling, punctuation and grammar. It's a 20-mark question. How far do you agree with one of those interpretations? Okay. How far do you agree with one of those, with interpretation 2, about the reasons for something? You'll be asked. Okay, so I'm going to go through each one of those in order, starting with question 1, the 4-marker. Okay, now question 1 is an inference question. You're given a source, and you'll be asked to give 2 things you can infer from source A about, for example, Hitler's leadership of the Nazi Party in the 1920s. Okay, what can you? So you're given a couple of sentence starters. 1, what I can infer. So you should read the source carefully. Hopefully it will have given you some ideas of what to write, and write in that section one of those inferences. The next subheading is details in the source that tell me this. Well, obviously you will select some detail from the source. If it's a written source, some quote or other. If it's an image, describe something from that image that gives you the inference that you've made. Okay, so you might want to start your sentence there. I know this because the source says that. Okay, so again, you just repeat the process for the second part. Source A also suggests that, something that you've inferred, and then details in the source that tell me this. I know this because the source says that. Okay, really straightforward. Should be able to do that in 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes at all. Okay, but make sure your inferences are supported. Don't just describe what you see. Okay, but I'll leave that there. That's the easiest one. The next question. Okay, question 2 is the explain question. Explain, for example, why Hitler was able to create a dictatorship in the period 1933 to 1934. Okay, so here you're given 2 bullet points. Here you can do it in 2 paragraphs. The important thing is that you are including something that has gone beyond the bullet points. If all you do is write 1 paragraph on one of the bullet points, say the Reichstag fire, and second paragraph on the second bullet point, which is the Night of the Long Knives, and you're not really going beyond the stimulus material, that's what they call it in the exam, then you're not going to get full marks. What you need to do is very clearly include something that is not from the source, the stimulus material, the bullet points. But you can do it in 2 paragraphs. So really all you need here is 2 point, evidence, explain, link paragraphs. Okay? You should have done that. We've practiced this plenty of times. All you need to do is make sure that you have got those 2 peel paragraphs. Use connectives for your opening sentence. The first reason for whatever it is the question's asking is blah blah blah. For example, provide your evidence, or evidence for this can be seen in. And then you need to explain this meant that, or this was important because, or this was significant because, or even better if actually, is this led to. Okay, that's one that we're quite big on at the moment. This led to. What was the consequences of this thing that you're talking about? And make sure with the L that you link that paragraph back to the question. Okay, so this meant that Hitler was able to create a dictatorship because it allowed him to whatever. All right, so make sure you link it back to the question and then repeat it. Do it a second time. But somewhere in that paragraph, you must make sure that you're including as much detail as you possibly can. Key terms, names of individuals, events, anything that is additional information to the information that you're given in the bullet points. Okay, so that's the second question. Moving on to question 3A. Okay, question 3A is study sources B and C. How useful are sources B and C to whatever it is you're asked about? So for example, how useful are sources B and C for an inquiry into the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement? Okay, and you're given two sources that are about the Hitler Youth movement. Now here, there's a particular formula, and I have given you this formula before, but I'll give it to you again here. Now listen carefully. The formula is, first of all, make an inference. So source B suggests that. Just treat it like any other inference. Remember, inference is educated guesswork. It's reading between the lines. What is something that you can infer from source B? The second thing is provide detail to support that inference, and you can even begin with, just like question 1 actually, detail from the source that tells me this is, right? So really the first two sentences are very similar to question 1. So an inference, provide detail, but then you've got to provide your own knowledge to support. To some extent, I know this is true because, and then something you know about that topic. Okay, something you know about the Hitler Youth and something that is in that source, but you're going beyond what the source tells you. You're including your own knowledge. Has to be detailed. Okay. And the fourth thing you need to do is evaluate that source. Now this is the bit where you go, this source has strengths because its nature is, or the source has strengths because of its origin, or this source has strengths because of its purpose. The nature, origin, and purpose are the key terms that you're looking at here. Now, certain sources have strengths because they are diary entries. Okay, now a diary, if the source is a diary, it will be pretty strong because it will have no need to lie. People don't lie to their diaries, so it will probably be quite an honest account of what this person believes. Okay, if it's a newspaper article, it will reflect the attitudes of the people who were supposed to read it, because newspapers don't sell if they don't cater to the beliefs of the people that they're trying to sell newspapers to. What else? If it's a photograph, it could be a really accurate depiction of the image that shows you how people looked, how they dressed, how they acted. Okay, think very carefully about how the nature of the source gives it strength. Equally, the nature of a source might give it weaknesses. So this source may have weaknesses because it is a diary entry. Now again, diary entry might have strengths because it's honest, but a diary entry is also just one person's view. It's only one person's view. You can't generalize to the whole of society just based on one person's diary entry. Equally, a newspaper article might be biased because the government might have wanted to say a particular thing about the Hitler Youth. Okay, so you can't necessarily trust it. So be aware, nature, origin, and purpose is what you need to focus on here in that fourth part. The source has strengths because. The source has weaknesses because. Okay, make sure you evaluate. So just to recap, for each of those sources, you need to make an inference, you need to provide detail, you need to back up that detail with your own knowledge, lots of key terms, and then lastly, you need to evaluate the strengths of the source based on its nature, origin, and purpose. And you need to do that twice for both sources. Okay? You don't need to say that one source is more useful than another. There's nothing in the mark scheme that asks you to do that. You just need to evaluate two sources. Okay? There's 8 marks for that, and you should be spending around about 10 minutes on it. Okay? If you're spending more than basically 5 minutes per source. Okay? That's 3A, and we'll leave question 3A, and we'll move on to 3B. And question 3B, it starts to get a bit strange now. We're in uncharted territory. This is where we're off the map for new questions in the new EdXL exam. Study interpretations 1 and 2. They give different views about, for example, the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. Now, remember, interpretations are not sources. Sources and interpretations are two different things now. Here, you need to identify a difference between the two sources. Okay, so first of all, you need to identify the main view that interpretation 1 has about, for example, the attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth. What's the main thing it's saying? Don't just say that one's positive and one's negative. Quite often that will be the case, but what is the main view? Okay, you'll need to back up what you say with evidence from the interpretation. You need to support the opinion that you come up with. Okay, and then you need to do the same thing for interpretation 2. You need to identify the main view of interpretation 2 as related to the focus of the question. So, in this case, attitudes of young people towards the Hitler Youth movement. And then, as for interpretation 1, you need to support this view. Okay, so it's basically just doing the two interpretations one at a time. But it'd be nice if you have a little connective between the two on the other hand. Okay, so you can see in the sample, you've got interpretation 1 suggests that the Hitler Youth movement was loved by most of the people involved, and there was plenty of activities. I know this because the interpretation talks about the excitement, blah, blah, blah. And then interpretation 2. On the other hand, interpretation 2 suggests that the popularity of Hitler was not as Hitler Youth was not as high as suggested interpretation 1, therefore contradicting it. I know this because interpretation 2 says that. We might want to go a little bit more in depth and talk about exactly what it is that interpretation 2 is saying about the Hitler Youth organisations. Alright, so it's pretty basic, pretty straightforward. Don't read more into it than there is with that one. It is just genuinely identifying difference between them. But really shy away from just saying one is positive and one is negative, right? You need to go a little bit further, and you need to pull things out from the interpretations that prove your point. Okay, so that's 3B. Moving on to 3C at 12 and a half minutes. Okay, 3C suggests one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views about the extent of German recovery in the years 1924 to 29. So, suggests one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views about something. Okay? Now, there are some tricks here. You'll find that they're just saying that they're different because they're different is not going to get you many marks. A really nice one is to say that the interpretations are different because they focus on different sources of information. So, interpretation 1 may be positive about the Hitler Youth organisation because it's based on sources from earlier in the war when the Hitler Youth movement was quite well led. Or it might be based on sources from people who participated in the Hitler Youth movement. Okay? A more negative interpretation, say interpretation 2, might be based on sources from later in the war when the Hitler Youth movement was badly led because most of the youth leaders had been called up to fight in the war. Or interpretation 2 may be negative about the Hitler Youth movement because it's based on the accounts of people who were badly treated in the Hitler Youth movement, okay, who have got a particular reason to hate it. So explaining that the interpretations may be different because they're based on different sources of information is quite a nice one to go at. Okay. Another reason for the difference might be reason 2. They may differ because they are partial extracts and may not actually contradict each other. Okay. Just because the bit that you're reading seems to contradict one another, they may be different because they're only focusing on a particular aspect of the Hitler Youth movement, for example. Okay, or finally, reason 3, they may differ because the authors have a different emphasis. The author might have a particular axe to grind, have a particular reason, a particular bias, for want of a better word. They're trying to, a point that they're trying to get across, so they will be emphasizing different things. Okay? But the important thing here is don't just restate that they're different. Don't just say they're different and give a reason, give a way that they're different. Give a reason why they're different, okay? And there are your ways in, those 3 ways in. Because they're based on different sources, because they're partial extracts and only focusing on a certain aspect, or because the author has a different emphasis that they want to get across. Now remember, you only have to give one reason, but you have to explain it. So don't go giving all 3. Choose one and really go to town on your explanation, okay? The sources one is quite a nice one, though. It's pretty standard. I think it's a way of kind of shoehorning a reason for a difference in the interpretations in any situation I can think of. So that's the one I would advocate. Okay, and the last question, 3D. Now, got plenty of time to go into this one because it is the trickiest one and it is the most valuable one. So it's worth 20 marks. This is the one you need to spend about 30 minutes on. Okay, 30 minutes on this question. If you're only leaving yourself 15 minutes, you are going to cost yourself a lot of time in the exam. Make sure you've got a beefy amount of time to get stuck into this 20 marker. Okay, now, just to restate the kind of question you'll be looking at. How far do you agree with interpretation 1 or interpretation? I'll ask you how far you agree with one of the interpretations about something. Okay, so in this case, how far do you agree with interpretation 2 about the extent of German recovery in the years 1924 to 1929? Explain your answer using both interpretations. Now that's something that people will overlook. Explain your answer using both interpretations. Okay? You need to make reference to both interpretation 1 and interpretation. It may be asking you how far you agree with interpretation 2, but you have to make mention of interpretation 1 as well. Okay? It may ask you, it may invite you to use the sources as well. What it will definitely ask you to do is include your own knowledge. Now, in your mock exams, a lot of you fail to include your own knowledge. You waxed lyrical about what you just read in the interpretations, but you neglected to talk about stuff that you know, stuff that you have revised. Why spend all that time revising if you're not going to throw in all those lovely key terms that you've stuck in your memory, right? You need to use your own knowledge here, right? So, begin with, state the view that that interpretation 2 is giving. Interpretation 2 supports the view that the recovery of 1924 to 1929 was built on weak foundations because it left Germany too dependent on the USA for loans and unemployment remained high. Great. Okay. Agree. Give reasons to agree. You've got to be balanced here. So first of all, let's find reasons to agree with interpretation 2. We can disagree with it later on, and we should. We need to be balanced. But for now, let's find reasons to agree with it. So start by agreeing. Agree with the view given in interpretation 2 using your own knowledge. Try and find 2 pieces of evidence if you can. So, it was certainly the case that the recovery of the Republic was too dependent on the USA, and when the American stock market collapsed in 1929, it had disastrous effects for Germany. Not everyone shared in the recovery. The lower middle class, whose occupations ranged from skilled craftspeople to newer jobs in the civil service, commerce and small business, did not fully recover from the hyperinflation of 1923. They felt that their interests were being ignored by the Weimar Republic. Okay, great. You've given a reason to agree with the interpretation. But then find a reason to disagree. Disagree with the view given in interpretation 2 using evidence from interpretation 1. Give 2 pieces of evidence from interpretation 1 to disagree. So, interpretation 1 challenges this view. Remember, you've got to use both interpretations. So just because you're being asked whether you agree or disagree with interpretation 2, use interpretation 1 to help you. But make sure you've got your own knowledge in there as well. Don't just think you can use interpretation 1 and forget everything that you've revised. You need to put your own knowledge in there. I can't emphasize that enough. Okay? Bear with me a second. Right. So, interpretation 1 challenges the view that the recovery of 1924 to 1929 was built on weak foundations because it suggests that the German people were better off and economic recovery led to political stability. Okay? Then also disagree with interpretation 2 using your own knowledge. Okay, so you have reasons to agree with it from your own knowledge. You have reasons to disagree with it using interpretation 1. And then you've got reasons to disagree with it using your own knowledge again, right? So with money flowing in from America, the economy seemed to prosper. Public works provided new stadiums, apartment blocks and opera houses. Big business had benefited from hyperinflation and had been able to pay off its debts and benefited from a period of industrial growth. Workers were generally better off during this period as wages increased and the average working day remained at 8 hours. Okay, you've given reasons to agree and disagree. You've used your own knowledge and you've used both interpretations. Now what you need to do is make a final judgment. Now, remember, a final judgment needs to give a reason why it is your judgment. Don't just say, well, I think this. What is it that makes you think that? Without one, the other thing couldn't have happened. Without X, there is no Y. That's basically what you're getting at with your judgment. Overall, I agree with interpretation 2. Because without such and such a thing could not have happened. That's what you're getting at with that in that judgment.
pick out the bit of evidence that really clinches it for you. A really nice phrase is, the reason that I really believe this is because, right? Something that really jumps out at you from interpretations and from your own knowledge that really drives home that you have an opinion on this. Make sure you have an opinion, and make sure you back it up. But above all, make sure that you are balanced and that you use interpretations, and above all, get your own knowledge in there. Make sure you've revised and show off what you know in that last answer. Okay? That's it. It's nice and short. It's only 20 minutes this session, so you can go through it again, but make sure you know how to do those questions inside and out. All right? This is revision session for Weimar and Nazi Germany number 5. This is the session that I'm going to focus on exam technique. So I'm going to go